Well, thank you very much and welcome as we continue to turbocharge the coal theme that we were just hearing in part from Steve and Jody. Michelle, lovely to see you, and Nick from Coal Australia, and proudly wearing the Coal Australia hat. It is interesting that we're here on a coal-specific panel, because it probably wasn't that long ago that was one of those words we dare not utter. Michelle, from your perspective, how have you seen the way the sentiment around the perception of coal has changed over the last few years, and particularly some thoughts on some of the meetings you have in terms of the perceptions around coal?
Well, I often describe my time in coal, which has been 6 years, to be quite schizophrenic really in terms of how it's perceived around the world. So certainly in developing and emerging markets, and in particular China and India, it's just go, go, go when it comes to coal. It's regarded as an ecosystem. It's really about a continuation of extracting more value per tonne. Chairman Coal India always reminds me, we don't have a problem with coal, you just need to let us know how to do it better. And certainly, my meetings with in China are really about, here's how we're doing it better. And so I think that's quite important. In terms of Western Europe, or really the global north, that has changed and is changing, but that's really based on a reality test that they're actually having to really deal with right now. We have, and always have, stayed quite factual and in our conversations. We've been talking as Future Coal on energy security, reliability and affordability. And for the first time, particularly in Western Europe, they're actually having to concede and now really regard energy poverty again, an energy trilemma that they thought they solved, but that's not something to be solved, it's something to always keep in balance. So I think that reality test is new. Obviously in the US, we've been working in the US for the last 3 years. People talk a lot about the Trump administration, but I think it's important for me to state that in our advocacy work, there was quite a bit of thinking, even under the Biden administration, around international competitiveness. And so that's really been front of mind for a lot of people. So now here I am back in Australia, and meeting with government, interestingly meeting with some investors who for the first time want to talk about that. In the last 18 months, I've certainly been having lots of off-the-record discussions with the finance, investment and insurance sectors worldwide. Many of those were in the Net Zero Banking Alliance and the Net Zero Global Asset Managers. You would see that those two bodies have fallen over. I think this is it's a real reality test. I think there's still a little bit of conversation, and certainly we hope to achieve this in our discussions with Australia, that we really need to progress and modernise our thinking on the coal value chain. This is more than just, I think we're still, here in Australia, it's still trying to work out whether you like it or not. Whereas in really the rest of the world, it's moving, even if it's reluctantly so, it's moving to, I need it. And so we're seeing some of those retirements of coal plants being pushed out in Western Europe and the like. So it's different, I think, but probably here in Oz, of all of the consuming and producing markets, it's probably a little behind.
Nick, just picking up on a point Michelle touched on there around the facts. Often we'll see activists and others making all sorts of spurious claims. They're not held to any sort of account. As a sector, we are. Increasingly, as we lean into some of those facts, they paint a very good perception and picture of the coal sector, don't they?
Oh, absolutely, Stu. I think this is one of the issues the industry's had over the last sort of 15 years, and I'm so pleased with what Michelle and Future Coal are doing globally, and what we've been able to do in Coal Australia in a relatively short period of time, and sort of turning the debate back, swinging the pendulum back towards the centre, because it's got way out of whack. You're right that the activists are held to a different standard. Nobody's really held them to account at all. I want to dwell on that a little bit, if I may, Stu. And some of you may have seen me talking about this, but Australians punch above our weight, not always in a good way. There was a paper written in 2011 called "Stopping the Australian Coal Export Boom." I carried it around with me just to get myself cranky from time to time, but it was written by John Hepburn, who's actually a self-declared son of a coal miner in Rockhampton, He'd spent 10 years in Greenpeace, and then with a few other mates he wrote this paper. They got money, they were looking for $4 million. They got money out of the Rockefeller Foundation, then they got Bloomberg, etc. This movement in 2011 actually became the Sunrise Project. Now, many of you may not be aware what Sunrise is. They don't have a great they don't come above the parapet very much. But in 2023, they received $129 million in grants from, the likes of our own Mike Cannon-Brookes. There's, as I say, Bloomberg, Rockefeller, a bunch of US billionaires and Australian billionaires, basically. They don't, because they've got DGR status, charity status, deductible status, they don't need to declare who their backers are, but some of them do anyway. And so this paper actually outlined a very comprehensive plan to destroy the coal industry in Australia, and beyond that, to be fair. But in my opinion, it was quite successful. So my point is that they sort of went out to take out the banks, the finance market. They deliberately went after the insurance market. Went after AXA, went after Allianz, then they went after Lloyd's, so that they wouldn't fund coal. They also infiltrated all the conservation movements, right? So Australian Conservation Foundation gets paid by them, so does Queensland Conservation Council, so does Mackay, Whitsundays, all of these guys. And then they stood up a bunch of more sort of, sensible sounding things like, doctors for the environment, surfers for climate action, parents for climate, vets for climate action, all this sort of stuff. So there's a whole ecosystem, hundreds of these things supported by of that $129 million they raised, they put about 75 into Australia. And so this has not happened by accident. We can sort of sit here and think, well, we've lost our social license. And I think, it's good to see it turning around a bit in the world. Australia's still behind the eight ball on this stuff, I think, politically particularly. But it hasn't happened by accident, it's happened by design. And so we're now in a situation where we have stopped the Australian coal export boom. So if you look at our exports from our production from 2011 to today, it's pretty much flat line, about 20% more. Indonesia has tripled in that time. So global coal demand continues to rise, we just don't service it. So that's a massive economic own goal for Australia. So yeah, absolutely. I think anything we can do to hasten that sort of reversion back to the mean in terms of sensible policy decisions about coal and energy more broadly is a good thing.
And it is interesting because whilst occasionally we'll be fed a narrative that somehow this is a dying sector, we've seen global coal consumption for last year at its highest ever on record, according to figures from the IEA, 8.8 billion tonnes consumed globally of coal, with the forecasts that will only increase again in this current 2025 calendar year. But based on that and putting the activism to one side, Michelle, what do you see as the biggest challenges to the coal sector going forward, and particularly working into your narrative around sustainable coal?
Yeah. Well, I think one thing that, to your point, Nick, it's been a well-funded narrative against us, but the global coal industry at large is not together on its narrative. And I've cautioned about this for all the years I've been in the job, which is why for Future Coal, when the independent research was done, there was a recognition, and there was a recognition when I was speaking to players in finance investment sector who really had allowed their sustainability people to kind of run the show. There's a real lack of understanding on the total contribution of coal, and as I put it, the tentacles of coal. This is a beyond power story. This is about steel, cement, chemicals, and even beyond combustion sectors of hydrogen or graphene, carbon fibre, coal and coal waste to high value products, critical minerals and the like. All of these things in terms of ecosystem are currently being thought about, considered and advanced by the two largest coal-based economies in China and India. And you made a comment about consumption just before being at this highest level. And 77% of that consumption came from China, India, and the ASEAN, who are thinking about coal as an ecosystem. They think about it beyond combustion. So it's really quite critical that as a global group of representatives in terms of consuming and producing nations, and in particular Australia, we step up and own the narrative that actually supports where we need to go and where we need to go forward. The facts for coal, and particularly because most of the anti-coal sentiment is really, directed at the the combustion area, and really around old technology of coal power plants. And I think when you look at the facts are incredibly compelling. And that's really been part of our issue. We've really leaned into the emotion of this debate. We didn't need to. We just had to lean into the facts. And certainly from Future Coal's perspective, just being really targeted and very strategic about how we actually, how we place those facts has been a real part of changing this debate and being part of a new conversation. I would just say that geopolitical coal, it's something I've termed, is actually quite important. I remember, the finance, banking, insurance sector saying, we'll try these exclusionary policies, it'll be fine, we'll shut down coal. Exclusionary policies have only really allowed new investors to come in, and it's not as transparent as we know. It was always going to be filled, and we know that global coal investment has continued to rise and will, even this year, by another 4%. So I think we've really got to just be very, very collaborative and understanding there's still more to be done together. There's still more alignment. I'm in these governments around the world. There's more alignment, there's more desire to work towards a larger definition of coal and to a combined definition of coal and a larger definition of sustainability, or sustainable coal as we coin it. I think, unfortunately, again, with a narrative that's just focused on CO2, this is, it's actually been irresponsible to allow that to happen. Whereas the emerging developing nations, their narrative is about self-reliance. Their narrative is about a broader definition of sustainability, which includes things like efficiency, waste management, and the effective, extraction of more value per tonne of coal. And by value, it's always in economic and environmental terms. These are not people who are not thinking about the environment. So that's a very unfair assertion that people make. These are people, though, that understand that there's a balance to be achieved. And that's really the narrative. Certainly, I think Australia, given our key role in terms of exporting some really good coal to the rest of the world, we need to get closer to our customer, our potential consumer, and probably a little bit a deeper understanding of what our further opportunities are for coal, particularly in the beyond combustion sector.
I spoke at a conference in Singapore earlier this year, and I was struck then by how differently coal from Australia was perceived relative to how many Australians would perceive coal in Australia. They were very grateful for the fact we're producing it, whereas we're sort of constantly trying to hold the line against activism and planning headaches and a range of different things. One thing I think when I hear Michelle just going through that, Nick, speaks to the resilience of coal as a commodity and as a driver of economies. One of the great things we've got on our side of the ledger is the lift prosperity that comes from coal, whether it's royalties, corporate taxation, a whole range of multiplier effects throughout the economy as well. Where do you see that fitting into the overall narrative in support of coal?
Oh, I think it's critical, and as you know, this has been our whole mantra, is to say, we're standing up for coal communities, we're standing up for people. Brisbane, as they say, is the biggest coal town in Queensland. I mean, Sydney obviously gets tremendous benefit from the Hunter Valley. And so I think that's, that telling those people's stories, and that, as you said, live prosperity is absolutely critical. I might just, so I don't forget, put the little ad in, Stu, you'll be pleased with this, but come and see Stu, or, sorry, I presume you got one of these yourself, Michelle, but...
Something we prepared earlier here.
Yeah, something we prepared earlier. Come see Stu or Steph or Jake here, and grab them if you're a supplier and you want to get involved in Coal Australia. There's a lot more we can do. But yeah, I think that's a critical part of it, Stu. And look, the other thing I'd say, just on the power side, Australia's not in a good place, right? I think if you look at it now, we're subsidising our big productive industries, what should be productive, like smelting, metal manufacturing, even plastics, even food manufacturing, are going to go, the way of the dodo, or they're going to have to be heavily subsidised. We're planning to close another 12, 13 gigawatts worth of coal over the next sort of 5 to 10 years. That gap's not being filled by renewables at the moment. It's just not, right? They're not being built. Wind and solar at scale are not being built, even with the capacity investment scheme. So, we're at a bit of a turning point here where the rest of the world, and US obviously leading, is starting to realise, as you said, Michelle, Europe's starting to realise they're going to have to keep this coal going, because it's actually a really good way of powering your economy. In Australia, we now have the highest electricity prices in Asia, which is kind of criminal when you think we export our coal and gas into our Asian neighbours, and we import back from China, obviously, wind and solar, which is intermittent, has driven our price up. So, we just need to have a good, hard debate about this stuff, and I think Coal Australia can play a role in that, to say, look, coal is here, coal is cheap. The reason we didn't go nuclear back in the 70s after the oil shock was that we had hundreds of years of cheap coal ahead of us, and we still do. We're just turning our back on it. So I think there's a lot more to be done there.
Just on that point, in terms of reserves, I know that's an area you're looking at, Michelle, with Future Coal, and I think some of those reserves speak to the fact that whether people like it or not, there is a demand for coal going forward, and those reserves and some of that detail around reserves becomes very important, doesn't it?
Absolutely, and I think, if we look again just to the US recently, they've made an announcement around actually upgrading their coal plants. This is based on the resilience and ensuring reliability and affordability. It's really looking at your reserves in terms of what else it can do. So I think the US is quite interesting at the moment. That 650 million is about upgrading the coal power plants to best available technology where it makes sense to do that. That's about a reliability of energy. But the other really interesting piece of work that they're doing with their somewhat 400 years of reserves is they're looking at what are those beyond combustion opportunities that exist in terms of extraction of coal from coal and coal waste. What can I get? And there's really incredible study going on about critical minerals, rare earths. In fact, one of the studies for rare earths actually demonstrates that the US can extract quite a few rare earths from coal, from their reserves of coal waste, and this is just about coal waste, but to a tune where they basically increase their reserves for rare earths to 8 times what they have now in terms of domestic supply. So I think that's fascinating. Graphene, another area of interest for them, carbon fibre, all really, new competitors for steel, for aluminium, all having amazing sector influence for a growing, developing population and the like. These are opportunities for Australia too. I mean, we've got lots of reserves. This is not just a combustion electricity story. This is a story about how do I extract the most value per tonne? How do I start looking at this as a multi-commodity product? That is the way the 2 largest coal-based economies look at it. That's what China's doing well ahead. That's what India wants to do. Obviously, there's a bit of focus on coal gasification and self-reliance and reducing their, their need for imports, particularly around the synthetic hydrocarbons. So I think, for Australia, it's about maturing your understanding of the opportunity around coal. Absolutely, you should be protecting and improving your coal-fired power. That's a given. Equally, you should be doing everything that we're all. I mean, Australians are the best coal mine, and known to be some of the best coal miners in the world. So that's fantastic. But in the downstream, there are so many other opportunities for us. Get to know your customer, get to know your client is a major message of mine this week, as it is to the finance and investment sectors here in Australia. You've got to have the ambition, and unfortunately, right now, that ambition really lies with our trading partners in Australia. you want a piece of that pie, I think, and that's really where the US is starting to think about it. And just very quietly in the background, we're starting to see some of the Europeans come back. I mean, they were some of the leaders in a lot of the technologies and the like, and starting to come back and think about what their participation could be under something that's much more responsible and seen as sustainable. So yeah, there's a new way to look at coal reserves, I think. It's really incumbent upon us in each jurisdiction to really think about how that is. Just make this one last point though, is that you can't now tell the coal story as a producer, you can't tell it as a consumer, and you can't tell it as a supplier. Today, you have to tell the coal story as a value chain. And obviously, in the Asian countries, because most of the vehicles are state-owned, there seems to be, it's a lot easier to tell a vertical or horizontal or get involved in a vertical, horizontal story across that value chain. That doesn't mean that as Australians, we don't have that opportunity. I often say to people in the developed markets, my own industry, that this is really about an opportunity for a joint venture mindset. And I think there is definitely more desire from those nations to work with more than just one player to really advance and modernize the value chain. So I think that's quite important in how we look at reserves. If we just see ourselves as an exporter, then that's a little bit of a risk, because the way coal is being developed and thought of in some of those key regions is part of a diverse stream of opportunities. And that doesn't mean that coal is going to necessarily be dominant. We also know that the likes of China are looking at diversifying their base load, as they should. Like, no one wants to put, all our eggs in one basket. That's just being sensible. But it's also about looking at, well, what do I do with this beyond? Is there some other opportunities that really create an efficiency and a value add that I want to be involved in?
So just thinking about that from a domestic viewpoint, Nick, we've seen recently the Queensland government with the release of its energy roadmap saying, well, we will use more coal for longer. Do you think in some respects that's going to be the template that other states, perhaps begrudgingly, might have to come to realise down the track, in line with what Michelle's saying about that value chain and beyond just simply an export market?
I do think that's going to happen. I think it will be grudgingly, depending on where governments go and where the governments change. The economics and the physics just doesn't work any other way for us. We're not. Our coal-fired power plants are pumping out electricity at $50 a megawatt hour or around that, 50 to 60. About a third to a half of what the grid is actually running at the moment on average. So it is cheap. It's our cheapest form of energy. I mean, gas is great. It's great as a peaking fuel, great for heating. It's just expensive in Australia. We've got $12 to $14 gigajoule gas, which means you're kind of $150 plus a megawatt hour for gas combined cycle. Obviously, uranium, nuclear is off the table for at least 2.5, probably 5.5 years, and then it's going to take 10 years and beyond. And I think nuclear is a great technology, but it is, we have to be honest, it's more expensive than what coal is. So, if you look at Victoria, for instance, they're going to shut your lawn 2028. That seems like a hard date. Certainly, they haven't sort of maintained it. The engineering is coming to the end of its life. There's 1.4, 1.5 megawatts coming out of the system that we don't know what's going to replace it with. It ain't going to be wind and solar. You can see what's happening at the moment in the transmission rollout and the wind rollout in Victoria and New South Wales. Same in New South Wales, right? If we do shut Araring, and or Bayswater, we're going to run out of power. And then we want to overlay on that data centres. If you look at AEMO, they want to they forecast about 3 gigawatts of data centres coming out of or coming into the system by 2030, which is a hell of a lot of new power. But we just don't know where that's coming from. So, there's a case for coal. There's certainly a case for maintaining coal, and we have to. If we don't do that, we're all going to be kind of broke and out of power.
You'd certainly see this in your travels around Europe and parts of Asia. As populations grow, demand for electricity and demand for energy more broadly is not static. It's only growing, Michelle, isn't it?
Correct, and we did a really interesting study with the ASEAN Centre of Energy, who we have an MOU with, and we look, because one of the key issues, we talk about 100% renewables, right? This is, let's get more and more renewables in. I'm not going to talk all to the why that doesn't make sense, but let's just go with this. The International Panel on Climate Change has already stated there's no 100% credible renewable scenario, but let's just put that aside. Let's just now look at it on a case-by-case basis. So the ASEAN, at the time we did this study, there was actually a very, very major bank that went out and said, we're going to buy all of the ASEAN fleet and we're going to shut these plants down. This is the youngest fleet in the world, 13 years, beyond sunk investment, which, it was just like the craziest thing we'd ever heard. But we thought, well, let's actually test this. So if you spend, and this is what we found, if you spend 26 billion to upgrade a low-grade plant from subcritical to ultra-supercritical or advanced supercritical, you actually, if CO2 is your main issue, you took 60 million, I just want to get this right, 60 million tonnes per annum of CO2 out, right? And that sounds pretty good and impressive. That's about 30 million cars off the road. If you did the same for offshore wind, that's what the ASEAN was looking at the time, you only took 30 million tonnes per annum of CO2 out. But here's the rub. You also took, and I want to get this right, 7 gigawatts were displaced. So reliability went down. And one of the great questions these kind of assessments have to be done case by case on, for whatever that jurisdiction is, whatever that nation is. But that's really quite important, the reliability factor, and beyond all the issues that people understand better than me about the intermittency of renewables and the true cost, the system cost of it. It is really important that we do the numbers on reliability, because that is effectively a massive cost. So when anyone talks, and this is really the contention for Europe now and others who are talking about retiring baseloads. So it doesn't matter what that might be. It might be nuclear, it might be gas, it might be coal, it might be something else. But whatever your base load is, you need to be looking at that reliability cost. And that's a conversation that's starting to happen a little bit more. So I think that's good.
Well, we'll certainly look forward to having that conversation as we go. We thank you very much for your attention today. We're just about out of time. It's been great to be able to catch up to you and look forward to continuing our work in terms of collaboration. Can we please thank Michelle Manook, the CEO of Future Coal, and also Nick Jorss, the founder of Coal Australia. I'm the CEO of Coal Australia, and if you want some more details, you can go to our website, coalaustralia.com. Thank you very much, everyone.